Hi, I'm Professor Kitty Millet, and I'm Professor of Jewish Studies. I specialize in comparative Jewish literatures and Holocaust studies, so I explore a very wide-ranging collection of themes, but most of my work either looks at literature as a redemptive practice, a practice that changes the way we think about the world and people around us, or I am teaching about Holocaust and the experience of persecution and how subjects become subjects of persecution and how they become objects of persecution.
Entitlement is contingent on a sense of fate. Now, why does this pertain here? Because you suddenly have this population that, as Kurtesh put it, we're not heroes. We're neither heroes nor martyrs. We are without fate.
What I was trying to get at with this course was to retrospectively trace for students these different perspectives on what was happening to these individuals from their own words. So it was all about narrative fiction or narrative memoir or narrative essays based on people who had actually been in these camps and who had been at them in different places. I wanted to also give students a chance to read texts whose fundamental primary language wasn't necessarily English. So I wanted my students to read that this event of the Holocaust wasn't just a Jewish event, that it encompassed many kinds of people, that there were non-Jews in the camp. They also read Charlotte Dilbo. They read Ruth Kluger, who was a Viennese Jew and German professor at Irvine, where I had studied. They read a lot of different people, but I wanted them to get it from across the spectrum. So the course is multilingual and it is multinational. I was teaching my Holocaust and Literature course, and one of my students said, we were looking at narrative essays from death camp survivors. That's very different from a concentration camp or a labor camp. The death camps were in place specifically just to kill Jews. That's why they were there. And so these narrative essays, at one point one of my students said, and this is a very American perspective, why couldn't they hope? Why couldn't they go through this experience hoping that it would change them for the better, that they would have hope of being rescued, or they would have hope? And I remember at the time thinking, okay, so I could respond to her and say, well, some did have hope. Others, I could say, didn't have hope. I could also say that what hope would they have? Who was going to come and save them? We're used to, when we teach about persecution in America, we come right back to the idea that if you survive it, you're a better person for it. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? But as I was sitting there with my student, I realized what she was trying to get at and what I was trying to teach was, how did these individuals carve out any kind of space for survival in a death camp, knowing that there wasn't going to be a salvation, they weren't going to be lifted out of there, they were going to be converted into ashes. And so for me, the question became one of, what happens to a community when its entire ontological existence, its entire being, is bounded by the idea of liquidation, of extermination, and how do I teach that in a classroom? And as I began to work through that in my mind of how I would respond to her, and we talked more and more about it, the idea came across very dramatically to me that my students wanted to know how they could intervene in this narrative, how they could be in this narrative, and I wanted to show them how they could be and could not be in this narrative. And so that became the premise for thinking about the kinds of persecutions that we know in the Americas and in Europe and in Africa as well, and how we frame those persecutions. What I want my students to walk away from this is to return the dignity through reading about these stories, about these individuals, to return to them dignity, and to walk away and know that they too can be dignified as they share and accord dignity to these victims.